Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you will redefine everything you thought you knew about presidential authority in America. The Supreme Court just dropped an atomic bomb on executive overreach, and the shockwaves are tearing through Washington as we speak. This isn't some procedural footnote buried in legal jargon. This is a full-scale constitutional earthquake that has obliterated the framework an entire administration built its power on. And here's the kicker that makes this story absolutely wild. The justices who delivered this crushing blow, they were appointed by the very president they just demolished. Let that sink in for a second, folks. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. For years, we've been told that court appointments were the ultimate trump card, the permanent legacy that would shield a political agenda for generations. That narrative just exploded in spectacular fashion. The court ruled 7-2 that the president's aggressive expansion of executive authority through a relentless wave of orders violated the fundamental architecture of American government. They didn't tap the brakes, they ripped the steering wheel clean off. Chief Justice Roberts didn't mince words in the majority opinion. The executive branch does not possess the constitutional authority to unilaterally commandeer powers explicitly reserved for Congress. Translation? The president tried to become a one-man legislature, and the Supreme Court just said, absolutely not. This wasn't a narrow technical ruling on some obscure procedural question. This was the court declaring in the loudest possible terms that there are hard limits to presidential power, and those limits are not negotiable. The vote wasn't even remotely close, guys. 7-2. That's not a split decision. That's not partisan warfare. That's an overwhelming constitutional consensus that transcends ideology. When 3 justices appointed by Trump himself vote against his exercise of power, you're not witnessing political betrayal. You're watching the rule of law function exactly as designed. The Constitution demanded they follow legal principle over political loyalty, and they did precisely that. Now, let me paint the picture of what happened immediately after this ruling dropped. Complete and utter pandemonium. Federal agencies across the government went into emergency crisis mode trying to figure out which directives are now legally worthless. Because if the president can't just decree expanded authority over federal operations, then how many policies currently in place are suddenly invalid? We're talking about a cascade of institutional confusion rippling through every corner of the executive branch. More than 25 agencies hit the pause button instantly. They're conducting frantic legal audits right now to determine what they're actually authorized to do versus what they've been doing based on executive orders that the Supreme Court just vaporized. The Office of Legal Counsel issued an emergency directive ordering a comprehensive review of every presidential order connected to these constitutional violations. The entire machinery of government is essentially frozen while lawyers figure out what's legal and what's been operating in a gray zone that just got exposed. Think about the magnitude of this moment. The president's entire governing philosophy was built on one core principle. If Congress won't act, I will. If legislators won't give me the tools I want, I'll create them myself. He redirected military construction budgets to fund border projects Congress refused to authorize. He claimed unprecedented control over independent regulatory agencies. He threatened to federalize state National Guard units in jurisdictions that opposed his policies. His approach was confrontational, aggressive, and designed to test every single constitutional boundary to see which ones would hold. For a significant period, those boundaries bent but didn't break. Congress complained but didn't act. Courts issued temporary injunctions, but the executive branch found workarounds. The system absorbed the pressure and kept functioning even as norms eroded. But there's a difference between bending and breaking, folks. This week, the Supreme Court declared that the breaking point had been reached and crossed. Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote a concurring opinion that will be quoted in constitutional law classes for decades. Separation of powers is not a suggestion. It is the foundational architecture that prevents tyranny. Those words came from a Trump appointee, and they completely gutted the administration's legal defense. The court rejected outright the theory that executive power should expand to fill every vacuum created by congressional dysfunction. They said, no, actually, Dysfunction doesn't justify constitutional violation. Legal scholars are already comparing this ruling to landmark cases that redefined presidential limits. United States versus Nixon established that presidents aren't above criminal investigation. Youngstown Steel established that presidents can't seize private industry even during wartime. This new decision establishes that presidents cannot invent new powers simply because existing powers feel insufficient. It's a categorical rejection of imperial presidency theory. The political fallout is spectacular to watch. Democrats are practically celebrating in the streets, calling this proof that institutions can self-correct when pushed to the brink. Republicans are fracturing in real time. Some are quietly relieved, viewing this as an opportunity to reassert congressional authority after years of watching the legislative branch become increasingly irrelevant. Others are absolutely furious, calling it judicial activism and betrayal of conservative principles. But here's the reality nobody can escape. The ruling is final. There's no appeal from the Supreme Court. This is now the law of the land. The symbolism is impossible to ignore, guys. The man who fundamentally transformed the federal judiciary is now being constrained by the very institution he reshaped. He appointed justices expecting loyalty and instead got judges who followed their constitutional oath. That's not how the story was supposed to go according to the political playbook, but that's exactly how the constitutional system is designed to function. Personal loyalty loses to legal obligation every single time when the system works correctly. But this isn't just about one administration or one president. The implications extend far into the future. By striking down this aggressive interpretation of executive authority, the Supreme Court just imposed new limits on every future president, regardless of party. The precedent is now set. Congressional power cannot be simply absorbed by executive decree. The legislative branch controls the fundamental machinery of government, and presidents must work within that framework or seek explicit authorization. For decades, both parties have pushed the envelope on executive action. Presidents have issued signing statements, created new programs through regulatory interpretation, and used emergency powers creatively to achieve goals Congress wouldn't authorize. Trump didn't invent executive overreach, but he accelerated it to a degree that finally triggered constitutional resistance. He pushed past the invisible line that previous presidents approached but never fully crossed. The legal pendulum that had been swinging toward executive dominance just reversed direction with brutal force. What comes next is gonna be messy, folks. Really messy. Every federal department must now operate under explicit congressional authorization rather than expansive executive interpretation. Programs will stall, waiting for legislative action. Agencies will need new statutory authority for operations they've been conducting under executive order. It's going to create gridlock and frustration and bureaucratic chaos, but eventually it will restore something that's been eroding for years: the constitutional balance between co-equal branches of government. Politically, this is devastating for the narrative of strongman executive leadership. It's a very public reminder that the presidency operates under law, not above it. The president is already claiming this is a coordinated attack by the deep state working through compromised judges. But the math doesn't support conspiracy theories. A 7-2 ruling with 3 Trump appointees in the majority isn't partisan sabotage, it's constitutional enforcement. For all the disruption this ruling causes, it also provides something Washington desperately needs right now: clarity. The Supreme Court answered definitively how much unilateral power one person should have in our system. The answer was unequivocal and backed by overwhelming judicial consensus. The president can protest, his supporters can rage online, his allies can introduce legislation to expand executive authority through proper channels, but they cannot claim anymore that the president has inherent unlimited power to govern by decree. This ruling accomplishes something no election result or congressional investigation ever could. It redefines the permanent boundaries of what the executive branch is constitutionally allowed to do. Those boundaries aren't negotiable, and they're not subject to political preference. The court became the shield that protected presidential power for years, but this week it became the wall that presidential power cannot breach. And that's the unfiltered truth nobody can spin away. This is the constitutional moment that actually matters, guys. If you believe the separation of powers still means something in America, smash that like button right now and get this video seen by everyone who needs to understand what just happened. Subscribe to the channel for fearless analysis that doesn't pull punches, and hit that notification bell so you catch every breakdown we drop. And drop your take in the comments below. Will Congress finally step up and reclaim the power it's been surrendering for decades?